Welcome to the Parsha Perspective. Each week, we will delve deep in a weekly Torah portion to find a practical and insightful way to enhance your daily life. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Rabbi Shalom Yamini, and each week we will look into the weekly Torah portion to find practical and insightful ways to enhance your daily life. This week's Parsha Perspective is in honor of our homeland, Eretz Yisrael. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to protect our brave soldiers and grant them strength, grant them victory, and may He watch over every Jew wherever they may be. The Parsha Perspective is in loving memory of Baruch Chaim ben Mordechai, Edward ben Ephraim, Shlomo ben Edward, and Yerachmiah Daniel ben Gedalia. May their souls be uplifted and may their memories be a blessing. This week's Parsha Perspective is in honor of the Refuah Shalema of Chaim Alexander ben Shterner Sarah, Uven ben Recholea, Binyamin ben Tova, Raphael ben Marzal, and Orna Basilili. May they have a complete and speedy recovery. This week is a double Torah portion, Parshas Vayakhel Pekudei, the altar within. Before I begin, we have an extra special Torah reading this week, Parshas Vayakhel, which recounts God's command to Moshe establishing the Jewish calendar and declaring the month of Nisan as the beginning of the months. Given just a few weeks before Yetzias Mitzrayim, this instruction introduced the mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon and the preparation for the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering. Our Parsha begins with Moshe Rabbeinu descending from Har Sinai carrying the second set of luchos, having secured God's forgiveness for the sin of the Egel Hazel of the golden calf. As he returned to the nation, he gathered the Jewish people and taught them the laws of Shabbos, along with the detailed instructions for the building of the Mishkan, God's mobile home in the desert. He then told them that Betzalel and Eliyav were chosen by God to oversee its construction. And the Jewish people responded with an extraordinary generosity. They were brought gold, silver, copper, precious stones, and every material needed for the Mishkan and its holy vessels, its holy kelim. Betzalel and Eliyav, they were skilled craftsmen, carefully constructed each component from the structure of the Mishkan itself to the Arein, the Menorah, the Shulchan, the Mizbeach, the altars, and the priestly garments worn during the service. The Torah then recounts and does an accounting of all the materials donated for the Mishkan. And once everything was completed, the components were brought to Moshe for inspection. And after confirming that all had been made exactly according to God's command, Moshe Rabbeinu built the Mishkan and consecrated it and initiated Aaron HaKohen and his sons as the Kohanim to serve in the Mishkan. And when the work was complete, the cloud of glory, the Shekhinah, descended upon the Mishkan, revealing that God's presence now dwelled amongst the Jewish people. And from that moment forward, the cloud would guide their journey in the desert. When the cloud lifted, they would travel, and when it rested, they encamped. However, a question comes to mind. Among the many kelim, the sacred vessels in the Mishkan, were the two mizbeachs, the two altars. The Torah describes the mizbeach hazahav, the golden altar used for offering the daily ketoros offering, the incense offering. And the mizbeach hanechoshes, the copper altar, was used for the regular sacrifices, the regular karbanos that was given every day. The Talmud in Chagiga writes that although many of the kelim, many of the sacred vessels in the Mishkan and in the Beis Mikdash were capable of becoming tamei, ritually impure, both altars, the copper altar and the golden altar, were different. Unlike any other vessel, they were not susceptible to tuma, to ritual impurity. But why were these altars treated differently from any other vessel? What is the lesson the Torah is trying to convey from this distinction? The Talmud in Chagiga gives us a simple explanation. The Torah describes the Mizbeach with the words Mizbeach Adama Tasali, an altar of earth you shall make for me. And from here the Talmud learns that the Mizbeach halachically is compared to the ground itself. And just as the earth cannot become tamei, it can't become ritually impure, the Mizbeach as well is not susceptible to ritual impurity. Furthermore, the Mizbeach did not function like other the kelim in the Mishkan or the Beis Mikdash. Most of the sacred vessels were movable objects, and therefore subject to the laws of ritual impurity or purity to Mentara. The Mizbeach, however, stood fixed in its place and serves as a permanent structure within the Mishkan and later within the Beis Mikdash. And because it was both compared to earth and not considered a movable vessel, a movable object, the Mizbeach did not receive Tumah like any other kelim in the Mishkan and later on in the Beis Mikdash. However, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem and Loshner, gives us a deeper and more profound explanation. At first glance, the Talmud's discussion about the Mizbech appeared to be purely technical. It addressed an halachic detail explaining why the Mizbech Hazav, why the Mizbech and Nechoshes were not susceptible to ritual impurity like other vessels in the Mishkan and the Beis Mikdash. But the Rebbe writes that these vessels in the Mishkan were never meant to be just understood as objects in the Mishkan or the Beis Mikdash. According to Chassidus, says the Rebbe, the Mishkan and its kelim reflected the inner design. It reflected the spiritual structure that exists within every Jew. Each keli represents a different element within a person. The menorah corresponds to wisdom and understanding. The shulchan represents sustenance and material life, and the mizbech, however, represents something far deeper. It is the place where offerings, where karbanos are given, and where a person symbolically elevates their own desires and returns them to God, returns them to Hashem. The Rebbe explains that this is why the Talmud emphasizes that the Mizbech cannot become ritually impure, it cannot become tameh. While many of the other kelim represented elements that can sometimes be clouded, that can sometimes be misdirected, the altar, the Mizbech, represented the innermost core of the Jew, the Pintel Yid. And at that deepest level, the Jewish soul remains connected to God regardless of circumstance, regardless of any situation. Even when a Jew appears to be distant from the Torah, appears to not do any mitzvahs, their inner desire, their inner will still want to fulfill the will of God. And the external layers of a person's life may be sometimes confused, may be sometimes distracted, but the essence of the soul, the Pintel Yid, remains untouched. And that inner point is like the Mizbech itself, a place where a person ultimately returns and reconnects. The Rebbe teaches us that this is the deeper meaning behind the halacha, behind the law, that the Mizbech cannot become tameh, cannot become impure. The altar represents the place within a Jew that remains always pure, that remains always tar. And just as the Mizbech in the Mishkan and in the Beis Mikdash were never susceptible to impurity, the innermost essence of a Jewish soul, the Pintel Yid, can never be truly impure. It can never truly disconnect. It can never have a severed connection with God. It can never be tameh. And this profound lesson from the Rebbe is ever more relevant as Jewish people across the world are coming closer to the Judaism, as our enemies grow increasingly open in their desire to destroy us. History reminds us again and again that the struggle against the Jewish people never truly disappears. But no matter how distant a person may feel, no matter how far they believe they have wandered, the connection between a Yid, between a Jew and God, is never severed. A person may think they're far away, but the truth is that a Jew is never truly distant. Torah and mitzvahs require time, they require learning, they require commitment, but a connection with God can happen in a single moment. All it needs is sincerity and honesty. It requires no preparation, no special setting. It requires the courage to turn inward. And when a Jew speaks to God with a genuine heart, the altar within the soul is already burning, reminding us that the bond, the connection between a Jew and God was never broken, and it will never be. In our daily life, it is imperative to realize that people often judge themselves only by their failures, only by the distance they feel from where they want to be. Yet a single setback does not define a person. Real progress begins when someone remembers their core values and reconnects to what truly matters. When a person realigns with their purpose, when he is consistent and honest, small decisions begin to reshape their future. And the individuals who achieve most are not those who never struggle, but those who remain anchored in their faith, anchored in their values, and continue moving forward until they begin to succeed far beyond what they once imagined possible. There's a profound quote that I read from President Ronald Reagan. The greatest triumph of a people is not just survival, but the ability to remain faithful to the ideas that first gave them life. Have a great weekend and good Shabbos. Thank you for tuning in to the Parsha Perspective. Check out our website, theparshaperspective.com. Send thoughts and comments to theparshaperspective@gmail.com. Till next time, thanks for listening.